disasters are happening more frequently all over the world. But there's nothing natural about so-called natural disasters. Disasters are social. So today, I'm going to talk about what happened in Japan in March 2011, called Great East Japan Disaster. Magnitude 9.0 earthquake, the fourth largest in recorded history, hit northern Japan, triggered massive, colossal tsunami. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was severely damaged. Series of explosions ensued. The radioactive contamination continues to affect the lives and environment to this day. Over 15,000 people have lost their lives. Over 2,500 remain missing to this day. As my fellow presenter articulated, gender is not a binary construct, but allow me to focus on women as a group that is historically and contemporarily oppressed and marginalized in Japan and beyond. Other positionalities such as race, immigration status, sexual orientation, religion, faith, all interact and affect your life chances and risks. So as you listen today, I like to think about how difficult it would be if this person is an immigrant, gender fluid, or has a disability. Gender inequity in Japan is enormous. Japan ranked 94th of the 134 countries on the Gender Gap Index by the World Economic Forum. 94th. It's pretty bad, isn't it? So what happened to women, this highly marginalized group in Japan, when that disaster hit? Gender-based violence. The National Police Agency released a special statement as of April 1. No case of rape or aggravated assault has been reported. But the absence of reported cases doesn't mean the absence of actual incidents. We had to collect our own data. In fact, as soon as I heard the news of the disaster, I began contacting my colleagues in Japan, telling them we need empirical data to advocate for and inform the prevention and intervention efforts in Japan. I flew back to Japan, and we conducted 2 studies after the disaster, which I'm going to be talking about. The first one is participatory action research using photo voice methodology. The second, a survey research to document gender-based violence after the disaster. Conducting these projects in the chaotic aftermath of the massive disaster was challenging, to say the least. But we're determined to do it. If we don't, who will? Little did we know at the time, 8 years after the disaster, the Photo Voice project is continuing and even expanding. So here's what we found. Not a surprise that domestic violence happened after the disaster. But the disaster didn't cause it. The vast majority of cases reported in our study are either the continuation, resumption, or intensification of the violence that had already happened before the disaster. Our analysis found various social processes behind this. Here's an example. What do you see in this picture taken by one of our Photo Voice project participants? There's pretty much nothing left. Even the lone building that still stands is severely damaged. Imagine what happened to a woman who lost her house. She probably has lost her job, her bicycle, car. The public transportation system was severely damaged as well. So more than before the disaster, you need to rely on others. What if that person is an abusive and controlling partner? And this person, after the disaster, now has a legitimate reason to demand or ask you in a sweet voice that you carry a GPS-loaded cell phone, because he's so worried about your safety and that he wants to know exactly where you are in case of another disaster. There are so many other ways in which that the control of abusive partner increased after the disaster. So what about violence by non-intimates? Just like the pre-disaster period, most cases didn't happen in the dark alleys by strangers. Majority of cases reported in our study happened where the victim evacuated to for safety, such as emergency shelter. Most people didn't have any other place to go, just like this cat in a photo taken by a Photo Boys project participant. Look, there's everything, water, food, even a toilet. But you are trapped and vulnerable. Look at this lone bird, the photo taken by the same participant. Imagine you lost your livelihood, residence, you witnessed death and dying. You yourself might have had a near-death experience. How frightened and powerless you would feel. In contrast, there are others who became and felt powerful. Who are they? Those who had resources, such as emergency shelter directors, who controlled the food and other necessities for survival. This is one of the cases that was reported in our survey. A woman lost her husband to the tsunami. She and her daughter went to an emergency shelter. There, the director of the shelter coerced her to have sexual relations in exchange for protection. She submitted out of fear that if she didn't, she would be kicked out of the emergency shelter, and that this director would assault her daughter. Sadly, this type of exploitation reported in our study must be a very, very tiny tip of the large iceberg. Here's a photo taken by another participant. She lost all her family members to the powerful tsunami that almost claimed her life. At the time she took this picture, she was living alone. But there's a pair of men's shoes. She was stalked by a utility service worker who had legitimate reason to enter her house for repair and checkup after the disaster. She contacted the police. They said they couldn't intervene, but advised her to buy a pair of men's shoes to pretend that you are not alone. The risk of gender-based violence is not over after the disaster. The very process of reconstruction can contribute to the risk, as seen in this picture by another participant. The scaffolding to repair a broken building can contribute to the risk of break-ins and peek-ins. And even without such actual incidents, your sense of safety is compromised for a long time. So there are so many other ways in which the disaster intensified the pre-disaster vulnerability of women and increased the risk of abuse and exploitation. Disasters are social. As Photo Boys Project and the survey participants told of many numerous risks of gender-based violence after the disaster, they also questioned, what is safety? Their question went beyond the personal and interpersonal. The 10-meter tall wall couldn't stop the tsunami, as you can see in this picture. But the Japanese government is now building 15-meter wall all around the coastline in northeast Japan. Sadly, Japan is not the only country that is building the tall, long stretch of walls, as we all know. Is this the way to ensure safety? Whose safety? Who benefits at whose cost? Our research efforts in Japan helped insert gender-based violence in the national and local disaster management plans and guidelines. A small, belated, but significant step forward. But these are measures after the disasters. We need to do more. Disasters are social, in that disasters intensify the vulnerability of women and other marginalized groups. Then we must address and try to eradicate the pre-disaster inequality that is structural and pervasive. Difficult. Yes, of course. This black screen says it all. Very difficult. But we need to work hard, no matter how difficult. Otherwise, we are leaving a heavy burden, too heavy burden, to the next generations, as expressed by one of Photo Boys Project participants. Thank you.